Ethan Carter wiped the grease off his hands and leaned against the half-repaired engine of the star freighter Nomad's Reach. The space station's docking bay hummed with activity, alien traders haggling, mechanics shouting, robotic drones hovering from one repair job to the next. It was just another day in the void, another paycheck for a human mechanic who had learned to survive in a galaxy where humans were often overlooked. Ethan liked it that way. He preferred machines over people, simple, predictable, and fixable. But today, something was about to change. From the far end of the bay, Zalara, the station's exotic alien receptionist, approached him. Her luminous violet skin shimmered under the docking bay lights, and her four golden eyes locked onto him with an intensity that made him uneasy. He had spoken to her only a handful of times, exchanging brief words about work schedules and landing permissions. But the way she moved toward him now, graceful yet deliberate, sent a strange feeling crawling up his spine. "I have watched you, Ethan Carter," she said. "You are different from the others. Strong, sharp, unlike these dull creatures around us." She stepped closer, her fingers tracing an invisible pattern in the air. "I desire you. I offer you a place at my side." Ethan blinked, caught between surprise and confusion. He had expected her to hand him a new repair order, not a love confession. He cleared his throat and forced a small chuckle. "Ah, I appreciate it, Zalara, but I'm not looking for that kind of thing. I'm just a mechanic. No time for romance, especially with someone like you." He gestured vaguely at her, unsure if he had offended her. For a moment, her expression remained unreadable, then her lips curled into a knowing smile. "A mistake," she whispered. "One you will soon regret." Ethan frowned, but before he could ask what she meant, she turned and walked away, her long cloak trailing behind her. He shook his head and went back to his work. Aliens were strange. He had dealt with all kinds of bizarre species, each with their own customs, beliefs, and odd behaviors. This was probably just another one of those. But as he picked up his tools, a sharp pain flared through his chest, and his vision blurred. His fingers trembled, his knees weakened, and the world around him twisted. Then, everything went dark. He awoke hours later in his cramped quarters, drenched in sweat. His body ached, but it was different, like something inside him had shifted. His muscles felt denser, his breathing steadier. His senses were sharper, the dim lighting in his room suddenly too bright, the hum of the ventilation system unbearably loud. He clenched his fists, and to his shock, his fingers felt stronger, almost unnaturally so. The sudden realization made his stomach twist. Then, he noticed Vex. Vex was his companion, a small, hovering mechanical creature that acted as both a repair assistant and an extra pair of eyes. It had always been a simple machine, limited to basic functions. But now, Vex was different. Its usual dull metallic shell pulsed with faint energy, and its optical lens glowed with an eerie, almost sentient light. It moved differently, sharper, faster, with purpose. It was studying him. Ethan sat up, his mind racing. What had happened to him? To Vex? And then he remembered Zalara's words. "A mistake. One you will soon regret." His heartbeat quickened. She had done something to him. Some alien trick, some kind of genetic tampering. He had heard stories of species with strange powers, capable of altering biology, but he had never imagined it could happen to him. He stood and moved toward the small mirror on the wall. His reflection stared back at him, sharper jawline, glowing veins beneath his skin, a body that felt unfamiliar yet powerful. The change was real. The station's security systems detected his anomaly within hours. Alarms blared. The artificial voice of the station's AI echoed through the halls. Unauthorized biological mutation detected. Subject, Ethan Carter. Proceeding with containment. Ethan barely had time to react before armed guards stormed into his workshop. But something deep within him had already adapted. The moment they fired their energy weapons, time seemed to slow. He saw the bolts of plasma as if they were moving through syrup. Without thinking, his body moved on its own, dodging, countering, striking. His hands ripped the weapons from their grips effortlessly, his mind calculating angles and movements with terrifying precision. Vex, now fully awakened, leapt into action. The once harmless drone morphed into a weaponized beast, its claws slicing through armor, its systems hacking into the station's control grid. Within minutes, the battle was over. The guards lay unconscious, and Ethan stood in the wreckage, breathing heavily, his body pulsing with raw, untapped energy. Then, she appeared. Zalara watched from the entrance, her expression unreadable, her golden eyes filled with something between awe and disbelief. "I only meant to humble you," she murmured. "Not this." Ethan clenched his fists, his mind surging with the knowledge of what she had done. But instead of rage, a strange calm settled over him. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was something more. His hands, once meant for repairing ships, had become tools of unimaginable potential. The war machine at his side was no longer just a helper. It was an extension of his will. "I think," he said, stepping toward her, his voice steady, "you didn't know what you were creating." Zalara took a step back, for the first time looking uncertain. "You cannot control it," she whispered. "The power will consume you." Ethan smirked. "We'll see about that." Without another word, he turned and walked away, Vex hovering beside him. The station was no longer his home. His future lay beyond the stars, in a galaxy that had no idea what was coming. Zalara had sought to teach him a lesson, but in doing so, she had unleashed something she could never take back. And now, Ethan Carter was no longer just a man. He was something far greater. Ethan Carter wiped sweat from his brow as he tightened the last bolt on the engine core of a battered freighter. The space station's docking bay buzzed with activity mechanics working on starships, traders arguing over cargo prices, and robotic drones gliding through the air, scanning for faults in the station's systems. Ethan had spent years working here, fixing ships that weren't his, for people who barely noticed him. He preferred it that way. He wasn't looking for fame or power, just a steady job and enough credits to keep his tools running. But today, his life would take a turn he never expected. ASE packed up his equipment. A voice called his name. He turned to see Zalara, the station's alien receptionist, approaching him. She was tall, elegant, her violet skin shimmering under the artificial lights. 4 golden eyes focused on him with an intensity that made him uneasy. They had spoken before, but only about docking schedules and repair requests. Yet, the way she moved now, graceful but deliberate, felt different. She stopped just inches away, her expression unreadable. "I have watched you, Ethan Carter," she said softly, her voice smooth like liquid metal. "You are unlike the others here. Strong. Sharp. You deserve more than this." She tilted her head slightly. "I desire you." Ethan stiffened, unsure if he had misheard her. "What?" he asked, half laughing. "Look, I appreciate it, but I'm not really looking for that kind of thing. I just fix ships." He stepped back slightly, uncomfortable under her piercing gaze. Zalara's lips curled into something between amusement and disappointment. "A mistake," she murmured. "But not mine. You will understand soon." Before Ethan could respond, she turned and walked away, her long cloak flowing behind her. He stood frozen for a moment, then shook his head. Aliens were strange. He had seen all kinds of bizarre customs in the galaxy, and this was probably just another one of them. But then the pain hit. A burning sensation exploded in his chest, spreading through his veins like molten fire. His vision blurred, his body trembled, and he collapsed onto the cold metal floor. His breath came in ragged gasps, muscles locking up as something unseen worked its way through his system. He barely registered the sound of his companion drone, Chomp, chirping anxiously beside him. When he awoke, hours had passed. He was in his small quarters, the dim lighting casting long shadows across the walls. His body felt different, stronger. He flexed his fingers, and they felt heavier, as if raw power coiled beneath his skin, waiting to be unleashed. He sat up, and his head spun with sudden clarity. He could hear the hum of the station's systems, as if his mind had tapped into the very pulse of the metal structure around him. Then he noticed Chomp. The small drone had always been a simple companion, just a floating mechanical assistant built for repairs. But now, something was wrong. Or perhaps, something was right. Its metal plating had darkened, pulsing with energy. Its tiny claws had elongated into something sharper, more refined. Its optical lens glowed a deep crimson, scanning Ethan with eerie intelligence. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was something alive. Ethan stumbled to his feet, breathing heavily. Zylara had done something to him, something beyond his understanding. His body had changed, and so had Chomp. He needed answers. But as he reached for the door, the station's emergency alarms blared. Attention, unauthorized biological mutation detected. Subject, Ethan Carter. Security forces mobilizing. His blood ran cold. They were coming for him. The door slammed open, and heavily armed station guards poured in, weapons raised. Ethan barely had time to react before they fired, but something deep inside him had already adapted. Time seemed to slow, every detail suddenly crystal clear. He saw the plasma bolts leaving the barrels, calculated their trajectories, and moved before they could strike. His body reacted like a machine, dodging with inhuman precision. Then Chomp attacked. The once harmless drone lunged, moving with terrifying speed. It tore through armor plating, its claws slicing through weapons as if they were made of paper. The guards didn't stand a chance. In less than a minute, the battle was over. Ethan stood among the wreckage, heart pounding, staring at his hands. He had taken down trained soldiers, not through skill alone, but because his body had evolved beyond human limits. Then she appeared. Zylara stepped into the room, her golden eyes scanning him with something between fascination and fear. "I only meant to humble you," she murmured. "Not create this." Ethan clenched his fists, feeling the raw power coursing through him. "You did this to me," he said, his voice steady but filled with something new. "Not anger. Not fear. Control." Zylara studied him, then sighed. "I meant to weaken you, to make you understand the pain of rejection. But your body adapted. It should have been impossible." She took a step forward. "Come with me. Let me guide you before this power destroys you." Ethan shook his head. "I don't need a guide." He turned toward the shattered security door, where beyond it lay the vast unknown of the galaxy. A future he had never considered before. "Then what will you do?" Zylara asked. Ethan smirked. "Whatever I want." With Chomp at his side, he stepped into the station's corridors, leaving behind the life of a mere mechanic. He was no longer just a man. No longer just human. He was something more. Ethan Carter never cared much for love. He cared about machines, about the hum of an engine running smoothly, about the way metal bent under the right pressure, about the satisfaction of fixing something that others had deemed broken. The docking bay of Orion's Rest, a massive space station floating on the edge of civilized space, had been his home for years. He worked, got paid, and kept to himself. He wasn't a hero, a fighter, or an explorer. He was just a mechanic. But all of that changed the day Zylara entered his life. She was unlike any alien he had encountered, tall, elegant, and impossibly beautiful, with shimmering violet skin and 4 golden eyes that never seemed to blink. As the station's receptionist, she controlled the flow of ships, the movement of cargo, and even the allocation of repair jobs. She had power, and she knew it. But for reasons Ethan couldn't understand, she had taken an interest in him. "You are wasted here, Ethan Carter," she had told him one evening, her voice smooth as silk. "I have watched you. I know your potential. You could be more." Ethan had barely looked up from his work. "I like where I am." Zylara had smiled then, but there had been something cold in it. "You do not understand now, but you will. One day, you will see what I see." At first, he thought nothing of her words. But then the invitations began. She would ask him to dine with her, to meet her in private chambers high above the station. Each time, he declined, always giving the same reason: he was just a mechanic. Eventually, the invitations stopped. He assumed she had moved on. But then, on a quiet night as he worked alone in the docking bay, she approached him one last time. "I offered you something rare," she said softly, standing just a few feet away. "You refused me." Ethan sighed. "Look, Zalara, I didn't mean to offend you. You will regret this." The words sent a strange chill through him, but before he could ask what she meant, she turned and walked away. Moments later, everything changed. A burning sensation erupted in his chest, spreading through his veins like liquid fire. His vision blurred, his limbs trembled, and he collapsed to the cold metal floor. His breath came in ragged gasps, his body rejecting something unseen, something unnatural. He tried to move, but pain crashed over him like a tidal wave, twisting his muscles, warping his bones. His mind flickered between consciousness and darkness, and the last thing he heard before the void claimed him was a soft, mocking whisper. "Now you will see what I see." When Ethan woke, everything was different. He sat up slowly, the dim lights of his quarters suddenly too bright, the hum of the station's power core too loud. He could hear the shifting of metal in the walls, the distant voices of workers he should not have been able to hear. His hands felt stronger, faster, like they had been reforged. He stood and caught his reflection in the metal wall. His once ordinary features were sharper, his muscles denser, and just beneath his skin, faint traces of glowing energy pulsed with every breath he took. Something had happened to him. Something unnatural. Then he noticed Vex, his small repair drone. It hovered nearby, but it, too, had changed. Its once dull metallic frame now pulsed with the same strange energy that coursed through his body. Its optics glowed an eerie blue, and as it scanned him, Ethan swore it was looking at him not as a machine would, but as a living thing would. A sudden, sharp voice echoed through the station. "Unauthorized biological mutation detected. Security forces mobilizing." Ethan barely had time to react before the door to his quarters slammed open. Armed guards rushed in, weapons raised. Hands where we can see them. One of them barked. Ethan lifted his hands instinctively, but the moment he did, something clicked in his mind. His body moved faster than he thought possible. Before the guards could fire, he was already on the first one, disarming him in a single, fluid motion. His movements were automatic, precise, like his muscles had memorized 1,000 years of combat training in an instant. Vex shot forward, its tiny claws extending into sharp, deadly points. It sliced through weapons, hacked into security systems, turned the battlefield into chaos. The guards had no chance. Within moments, they were all unconscious or scrambling for escape. Ethan stood in the wreckage, heart pounding. His body thrummed with energy, his mind sharper than ever. He had been reborn, and he knew exactly who was responsible. Zalara was waiting for him. She stood in the upper levels of the station, watching as he approached. There was no fear in her expression, only curiosity. "I expected you to die from the process," she admitted. "But instead, you adapted. Fascinating. You did this to me." "I did," she said simply. "And now, you are no longer just a mechanic. You are more." He took a slow breath, the new power within him crackling just beneath his skin. "You wanted me to suffer," he said, realization dawning. "You wanted me to crawl back to you, begging for help." Zalara smiled, unbothered. "And yet, here you are, standing tall, stronger than before." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan smirked. "Yeah. And now, I don't need you." He turned away, stepping toward the nearest docking bay. He didn't know where he would go, only that he wouldn't stay here. Zalara had tried to break him, to make him regret rejecting her. Instead, she had forged something unstoppable. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Carter was no longer just a nameless mechanic. He was something far greater. Ethan Carter never wanted to stand out. He was a mechanic, not a soldier, not a hero, just a man who fixed ships in the depths of space. Orion's Rest, a massive trade hub orbiting a dying star, was home. He liked its noise, its constant movement, the smell of engine grease and burning plasma. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was his. Until she tried to take it away. Zalara was an alien of status, a member of the HFY, a species known for their intelligence, beauty, and influence. As the station's administrator, she controlled everything that moved cargo, personnel, security. But for some reason, she had set her golden eyes on him. "I have watched you," she had said one evening, her smooth voice carrying an unnatural weight. "You are unique among your kind." Ethan had shrugged. "I fix ships. Not much else to me." Zalara tilted her head, her 4 golden eyes glowing softly. "There is more to you than you realize, and I could help you see it." He knew what she meant. He had seen it before, aliens fascinated by humans, drawn to their unpredictability, their chaos. But he had no interest in whatever she was offering. "I'm fine as I am," he said simply. Her expression darkened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she smiled, a slow, knowing thing. "You may believe that now, but soon you will see the truth." Ethan had shrugged it off, assuming she would move on, find someone else to focus on. He was wrong. That night, as he worked alone in the repair bay, a sudden, unbearable pain shot through his body. He collapsed, his breath stolen by the fire burning through his veins. His skin tingled, his muscles spasmed, his vision blurred as his very DNA twisted into something else. It felt like he was being remade, rewritten at the most fundamental level. He tried to scream, but no sound came. When he finally woke, everything was different. His hands felt heavier, stronger. The lights in his room were too bright, the sounds of the station too loud. He could hear the hum of the reactors as if they were part of him, feel the vibrations of footsteps several floors away. His body pulsed with a strange, unfamiliar power. Then he saw Chomp, his small repair drone. It hovered beside him, but it wasn't the same. Its metal plating had darkened, its optics glowed a brilliant red, and its tiny limbs had extended into something sharper, something alive. The drone chirped in recognition, scanning him with something like awareness. Ethan stumbled to his feet, his mind reeling. What had she done to him? Before he could process, the station's alarms blared. "Unauthorized biological mutation detected. Security forces en route." Panic surged through him, but it wasn't the same kind of fear he had felt before. This was different, controlled, precise, focused. He moved before thinking, his body reacting faster than it should. His muscles carried him across the room in an instant, every movement efficient, calculated. He was faster, stronger, more. On the ground, now, but Ethan had already seen their weaknesses. His mind analyzed them in real-time: armor joints, weapon charge rates, movement speeds. It was like instinct, like a predator assessing prey. Before the first guard could fire, Ethan moved. In a blur, he was on them. He ducked under a plasma bolt, closed the distance in a single step, and tore the weapon from the soldier's hands. A single strike sent the man crashing into the wall. Chomp darted forward, its newly enhanced limbs slicing through weapons, disabling them in seconds. The battle was over before it had begun. Ethan stood over the unconscious guards, heart pounding, his body thrumming with unnatural power. He should have felt horror. Instead, he felt alive. Then he heard the slow, deliberate sound of clapping. Zalara stood in the doorway, watching him with something between admiration and amusement. "Remarkable," she murmured. "You did not just survive the transformation. You thrived." Ethan's fists clenched. "You did this to me." "I did," she admitted, stepping closer. "I wanted you to understand, to see what you could be. Humanity has always been underestimated. But now, you are proof of what lies beneath the surface." Ethan shook his head. "You thought you were punishing me," he said, realization dawning. "But you didn't make me weaker. You made me stronger." Zalara tilted her head. "And what will you do with that strength?" Ethan turned toward the docking bay, where the vastness of space lay just beyond. He had spent his life fixing ships for others, never thinking beyond the next repair job. But now, something had changed. He was no longer just a mechanic, no longer just human. He was something more. He stepped forward, Zalara's voice followed him. Whatever you become, Ethan Carter, remember this. I gave you the gift of evolution. The rest is up to you. Ethan smirked, stepping into the unknown. Then let's see just how far I can go. Ethan Carter had always been a man of machines. He understood metal, circuits, and engines better than he understood people. Working as a mechanic on Orion's Rest, one of the largest space stations in the sector, gave him purpose. He spent his days repairing ships and his nights enjoying the quiet hum of power cores. It wasn't an adventurous life, but it was his. He never wanted anything more until the day Zalara took that choice away. Zalara was an alien of the HFY, a species known for their intelligence and influence. As the station's administrator, she commanded respect. But for some reason, she had taken a strange interest in Ethan. She often watched him work, lingering in the docking bays, her golden eyes observing his every move. At first, he ignored it. Then came the conversations. "You are different from other humans," she had said one evening, her voice smooth as silk. "There is potential in you." Ethan had wiped grease from his hands, barely glancing up. "I just fix ships. That's all." Zalara tilted her head, smiling faintly. Not for long. Her words unsettled him, but he brushed them off. He had no interest in alien politics or whatever strange fascination she had with him. He was a mechanic, and he liked being a mechanic. So when the invitations came to meet her, to dine with her, to step beyond his ordinary life, he refused. Every time. Then, one night, everything changed. Pain unlike anything he had ever known tore through his body, searing his veins, twisting his muscles. He collapsed to the cold metal floor of his workshop, gasping as his skin burned from the inside out. His mind blurred, his thoughts scattered, and his body changed. It felt as if something had reached into his very DNA and rewritten it. He didn't know how long the agony lasted, only that when it finally stopped, he wasn't the same man anymore. When he awoke, everything was sharper. The hum of the station's power core wasn't just a sound. He could feel its rhythm, its fluctuations, as if it were part of him. The air smelled different, charged with energy he had never noticed before. His hands were steady, too steady, like they had been calibrated for precision beyond human capability. And then there was Vex. His personal repair drone, once a simple, mindless tool, hovered beside him. But now, its metallic surface pulsed with a faint blue light, its optics glowing as if aware. Ethan barely had time to process this before the station's alarms blared. Unauthorized biological mutation detected. Security forces mobilizing. The door to his workshop slammed open, and armed guards rushed in. "Stand down," one of them barked, aiming his plasma rifle. Ethan raised his hands, but the moment he moved, something clicked inside him. His body calculated the distances, the angles, the reaction times of every soldier in the room. He wasn't just seeing them, he was analyzing them. Their armor was reinforced, but had gaps at the joints. Their weapons were high-powered, but took a split second to charge between shots. Instinct took over, and before the first guard could fire, Ethan moved. 1 second, he was standing still. The next, he had disarmed the nearest guard in a blur of motion. His hands moved with unnatural precision, twisting weapons out of grips, striking at weak points. Vex darted forward, its tiny limbs extending into sharp, precise tools, disabling weapons and hacking security feeds. Within moments, the fight was over, and the guards lay unconscious around him. Ethan stared at his own hands, his breath coming fast. What had she done to him? The answer came a moment later. "Impressive," a familiar voice murmured. Ethan turned to see Zalara, standing calmly at the entrance. She didn't look surprised. If anything, she looked pleased. "You survived," she said, stepping forward. "More than that, you adapted." Ethan's fists clenched. "You did this to me." Zalara nodded. "I unlocked your potential." "You had no right," he growled. Her golden eyes gleamed. "And yet, you are more than you ever were before. You feel it, don't you? The intelligence, the strength, the connection to the machines around you." Ethan wanted to deny it, but he couldn't. He could feel the station's systems like a second heartbeat. He understood technology on a level that wasn't human anymore. The air shimmered with possibilities, things he could build, improve, control. Zalara's voice softened. You were meant for greater things, Ethan Carter. Now, you have the power to shape your own path. Stay, and I will help you refine it. Ethan took a slow breath. He had spent his life fixing things for other people, following orders, keeping his head down. But now he could build something for himself. He turned toward the nearest docking bay, where ships waited to take him anywhere in the galaxy. No, he said finally. I think I'll find my own way. As he stepped forward, Zalara's voice followed him. Whatever you choose, remember this, you are no longer just an engineer. You are something greater. Ethan smirked. Guess I'll have to see just how far I can go.